Hi, and welcome to the Law Center videocast. I am your host and founder of the Law Center, Larry DeMarco. Thank you for joining us this evening. We go live on Tuesday nights at 7 p.m., so please join us in the chat room on the right where you can interact with other viewers. Today we have a special guest here, Beverly Willett. She is an author, co-founder of the Coalition for Divorce Reform, and a former entertainment attorney in New York City. She's the author of Disassembly Required, a memoir of midlife resurrection. It's a story about starting over after the American dream implodes, which was nominated for Georgia Author of the Year. She has written for the nation's largest print and online publications, including the New York Times, the Washington Post, USA Today, AARP Magazine, the New York Post, and many more. She gave a popular Tedx Talk entitled How to Begin Again. Beverly, thank you for being a guest on the Law Center videocast.
Thank you. It's great to talk to you this morning.
I understand you co-founded Coalition for Divorce Reform. How did you become involved with the cause?
Well, in a very unfortunate circumstance, in that I went through my own divorce, which was a very difficult, protracted divorce that I didn't want. I wanted to save my marriage. Unfortunately, I was not able to, and the family law system was completely, geared up to force the divorce. Basically, and that's really what family law is set up to break people apart, not to do anything to help them whatsoever. So I found myself in this situation, and I had started writing beforehand. I had been a lawyer. I had stopped to take care of the children full time, had this divorce that I didn't want, and I started writing about my experiences. So I wrote some very, very popular articles, and then Huffington Post Divorce asked me to join their vertical. I did radio interviews, and I came to the attention of my other co-founder, who had been at HHS and also had done a lot of work with marriage education, was really tapped into people trying to do something about divorce and marriage education. And he found my articles and he said, wow, he said, you're a registered Democrat, and most of the people who are speaking out about, families and stuff are on the other side. And is there some common ground here that we actually have? And so we started talking, and our idea was that, we want to see if other people are interested and build something that was truly bipartisan. Where can we find common ground that people agree that marriage is important, families are important, and let's not get into some of the other issues that separate people in a partisan way, as we know. And so we did. We started meeting with people. We brought in people who were advisors, from think tanks and lawyers, marriage educators, therapists, academics, people doing heavy research into the area, and brought all these people together, got ideas, put together some model legislation. And the idea was, it was all voluntary for many years. The idea was it would be basically two-pronged. We would have this model legislation, and we were interested in affecting policy and getting that information out there to policymakers. And then also just educating the public, because we thought that those are the two things that really have to happen in divorce reform. You've got to have the policy people, you've got to have the legislators behind you. And then you really have to educate the public, and you have to start changing hearts and minds about this. So let's educate the public. And so we started a website, which I basically curated, and getting all these people in these various areas to write for us about all these various topics. So it just kind of fell into my lap because I felt compelled to write about my own experiences.
And I want to make a point. Your celebrity status, I ask this because you have a strong resume, but the celebrity and the takeoff of these articles wasn't for anything particularly that you did with law. This was your rebirth that is gaining this publicity, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And, as a lawyer, I did copyright and entertainment law. And until I didn't even really know, people who'd gone through a divorce. through the system. And so it was a complete rude awakening for me to be in family court and to know all this went on. I mean, the last time I'd, even been, I guess, familiar with that had been, taking the bar exam and cramming all that information. I was completely blown away by what I found. So no, it was basically my own personal experience. And then I started learning about this area of the law and all the research, behind the whole situation.
So why do you think that our country needs this divorce reform? And I know this is a very thick, meaty topic. So do your best. So I apologize for giving such a loaded.
Yeah, I'll just tick them off quickly. So without going into them.
Yeah, I apologize for the loaded question.
And as a lawyer, I made a little list in case I forget one because
okay, great.
It's like,
go ahead.
I still have that lawyer mind.
I understand.
So I guess the first reason is that, this experiment with NoFault Divorce, which is about 53 years old, is a failed experiment. Okay, so it was to the extent that it was that had various purposes in lowering the divorce rate, in basically diffusing the animosity between couples in court. It's totally failed. It went completely the opposite way. Very quickly after these laws were enacted, the divorce rate doubled. It's not at that level now, but it's still much higher than it was before NoFault ever came to being. Okay, so, and the animosity, it just shifted from people arguing about whether we're going to get a divorce to the financial issues, to custody, children, all of that. So the animosity did not decrease. In fact, the animosity increased because now what we had a very small matrimonial bar. Now what we have is a huge matrimonial bar and this huge family court apparatus and system that's multi-billion dollars. It was not that way 50 years ago.
And it has to be fed. We have to feed the beast.
That's exactly. We have to feed the machine. Okay. So that's one thing. It's a failed experiment. Now we have this huge machine. We also know, so the divorce rate is still a lot higher than it was. Okay. And people might say, well, what's so wrong with that? People want out of divorce. What we know now, because what we didn't know then, is that we have this body of research. Now that we have NoFault over 50 years, we've had academics, research and think tanks research. Well, what has been the effect on our society of this experiment? And we have a body of research that shows that this experiment has been horrific on all levels for men, women, and children across the board. So many negative consequences. Women today have 41% less household income, even with the reforms to make things more balanced between men and women in court. We know that the suicide rate for married men is higher than the suicide rate generally, okay? And for unmarried men, for divorced men, I'm sorry, let me correct myself. And that suicide rate for men is going up. We know on all levels of economic well-being, physical well-being, emotional well-being, that this is horrific for children. Now, that doesn't mean that every single divorce, these things are going to come to play for your children, but we have to look at it as a whole. So we know the negative consequences to children is horrific. They have, their longevity has gone down. They're more depressed. They're more prone to suicide. They're more prone to drug addiction, smoking, less educational attainment, juvenile delinquency. I mean, poverty, it just goes on and on. So we know this is not good, and it's causing a lot of problems. On the other side, we know that marriage is we contrast that to all of what I've said. We know that marriage actually builds wealth. We know that where marriage is strong, we have safer communities. Let's not get into safety, but we know what's going on in our country. We know that communities are safer the more people that are married.
Sure.
And I'm not talking about like domestic violence and things like that. Let's put that to the side. I'm talking about low conflict marriages, which are the bulk of those marriages that are actually going through divorce. So those are the ones that are salvageable, savable, and they are tools for saving those marriages. So that's another thing. Why not save the low conflict marriages that we can, because we know marriage is a public good and we know that divorce is not. So let me just see what else. And I guess the other thing is that it's unconstitutional. We need divorce to form because no-fault divorce is unconstitutional. So that's pretty high up on my list.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You just led me to my next question, of course. What do you mean? Why is it unconstitutional?
So just for listeners who don't maybe know what no-fault divorce is, and on a very basic level, there's no blame game. Before no-fault divorce, in order to get a divorce, you have to assert some kind of harm that you've suffered or some kind of wrong that your partner has committed against you. It could have been adultery, abandonment, cruelty, domestic violence. That's, basically most of it. So states that enacted no-fault divorce, sometimes they still retain those provisions, but then they added something else on, which basically says you can get a divorce if you allege, meaning you, the plaintiff, you, the spouse who wants out of the marriage, you come in and you say, my marriage is irretrievably broken. We have irreconcilable differences in the marriage. And that's really the end of the inquiry, meaning that a spouse who goes under oath and swears that automatically goes to go, gets a divorce. And then the judge focuses on the other part, which is the economic situation and the children. So it's unconstitutional because it violates due process. I mean, we know from the 14th Amendment that we're entitled to, a due process, and we can't be deprived of our life, liberty, and property without due process. So there are really, I think of, 5 basic elements in a due process procedural situation. And that means the plaintiff has to come in and allege some kind of harm with specificity, because you can't defend against something that you don't know you've done. So the plaintiff has to come in and say, the defendant has done X, Y, and Z. Okay. Well, here we don't have any harm and we don't have any wrong that's being caused. We basically have the plaintiff's feelings. And I just really think that these statutes are basically a happiness statute. I'm not happy. These differences are irreconcilable. I think of it as a happiness statute. Well, good luck trying to define happiness. So that's the first prong that's not met. The second is, in a procedural due process situation, the defendant has the right to defend themselves. Well, the defendant has no opportunity to defend themselves. It's the plaintiff's word is taken as truth. Third, you have the right to cross-examine witnesses, to bring evidence. None of that exists. The defendant cannot do that. And the other prong is that you have a right to impartial decision-making. But the judge here doesn't weigh anything. The judge is not being impartial. The judge, by law, under these no-fault statutes, must rule with the plaintiff every single time. It's a given. So you fail on all level of procedural due process. And the second thing is that, there's something called substantive due process. And it has long been recognized in this country by the Supreme Court that there is a fundamental right to marriage. And what that means is this is one of the really big rights that sits way at the top of the pyramid, okay? This fundamental right to marriage. So you have this fundamental right to marriage that's been recognized, and it's literally taken away with the word of the plaintiff. So it violates, substantive due process as well. I mean, that's basically it in a nutshell.
If I could clarify, when you say it violates due process, is it the financial penalty or lack of one that it actually is being violated? Or let's put it this way, does the defendant, the person who is being aggrieved or being left and abandoned, so if their due process is being violated because of this no-fault divorce, is there a financial element in there that person's being deprived of?
Well, I mean, there's no compensation for the deprivation of the right. People can say, well, yeah, you get the property split up, and so you get some of your property, but that property was already owned by that person. There's no compensation that is being given to that person financially. And then the question becomes, and we could talk about this for an hour, even if there was some compensation for the deprivation of the right, is that enough? Does that rise to the level of being deprived of a constitutional right that we know is subject to strict scrutiny when you look at those statutes? But beyond financial, I mean, it's this right. The Supreme Court said in the Obergefell decision, which was a same-sex marriage decision, that they talk a lot about marriage. They hadn't really had a big marriage decision in a long time. So it allowed them the opportunity to really, let's talk about marriage and what marriage means and how important it is. And it says that it is greater than the two people. It forms something else that is greater than two people, which basically means to me, it's the kind of thing that you can't put it in half. It's not a half and a half. It forms something greater than just the two. So that kind of goes to your finance things too. Well, like why can't we just chop it down the middle? Because this is greater, and it has all kinds of benefits and things that accrue from it. Just as I've talked about, longevity. I mean, just about, so how can we compensate for that? If my longevity is decreased, if my physical health is decreased, if I'm living on less money and my household income has gone down, if my children are more susceptible to all of these negative things, how do we compensate for that?
So when you talk about due process, you're talking about the aggrieved party's loss of this greater whole. You're not just talking about the fact that in NoFault Divorce, they don't include finances so much. If someone does something that's traditionally you had to sue for, abuse, abandonment, things like that, they could get punished financially, but now we've taken that away, correct?
That is absolutely right. There is no consequence to that at all. And, so it's the only contract that is just terminable at will. If you just think of it just in terms of, because most people, have signed a contract before, maybe a mortgage contract or an insurance contract for their car. I mean, so most people are familiar with basic contracts. Think about the fact that if you sign a contract and you're supposed to get something out on the other side, I mean, people have obligations to each other. Well, this person can just come along and say, no, we don't want to mortgage you anymore. We're cutting that up. I mean, you have rights under that contract. You have, and if you want to sue someone else because they've breached it, then they have obligations potentially to you. But this is not like any normal contract at all. And yet it is one of the most fundamental, important things in our whole society.
So it's two things then, or if not more than two.
Yeah.
But number one, it basically renders a very solemn contract into a non-contract at all if someone can unilaterally break it. That's one thing. But number two is taking away the damage provision of that breach. Usually in a breach of contract, we can sue for damages, but now this no-fault divorce is ending that. But you don't stop there. You actually have the third thing you're explaining today, which I actually wasn't aware of, was part of your argument, is that marriage between two people is more than just twice as strong. It creates a greater whole that person can be stripped of without requiring someone to present evidence.
There you go. Yep. Very well.
Thank you for clarifying that. I did not understand that until we spoke. So sadly, there's not the political will for abolishing no-fault divorce. And I know that which is evident, but do you have an opinion as to whether there's any partial elements or something that can get done to move the needle politically?
Well, So, that's really what we tried to do with the Coalition for Divorce Reform. We were not looking at abolishing no-fault divorce, because part of it was growing this nonpartisan or bipartisan, collective, if you will. And so we just started with very modest, what I consider very modest legislation, which didn't do away with that at all. It basically said, for those couples who are in low conflict marriages, let's take a little pause before they get to the courthouse steps. Because once we know that they're involved in the courthouse, and they've got all this whole apparatus and they've got the lawyers, there's very little chance that that marriage is going to survive. And no one who is involved in the process has any interest, really. I mean, I would have to say, I do know some really good divorce attorneys who really care about marriage. So let me just not put 100% on that. But by and large, that's just not what they do. It's not part of what they do. And the whole goal is to split this couple and split the family. So
because of the financial incentives.
Well, yeah. So our legislation was basically saying, once they file the papers, it's a low conflict marriage. We have this education program to basically tell people, these are the consequences. This is what's going to happen in court. This is what's going to happen in terms of, your life going forward. And this is the body of research. So people are informed and they don't learn about it later. Okay. Other thing is that then if these people, if what they're really facing is they're struggling over finances or they're just not communicating well, which are two of really the biggest reasons why people get divorced. There's also adultery too, okay? But the biggest reasons really are financial disagreements and communication problems. And so let's give them some help in that. Let's give them some skills. And, there's research that has shown, that has taken couples before who've done this. And, and also if you create a pause, if you create a situation, when you're in the heat of anger, you're in the heat of frustration, you can tend to act sometimes. And then you go darn it, why did I do that? If I just, if I'd taken 5 minutes before I shot that email off, maybe, so, I mean, that's just intuitive. You take a little pause and people can think better, people can calm down. And so it created this little waiting period. And then people could go on, if that didn't work and they still wanted their divorce, they could go on with it. I mean, literally, this was what that legislation was. And even that was not something, we went to a few states, there was some interest in some states, legislation did get introduced. But ultimately never passed, and there was so we didn't even get to no fault, and we were just trying to introduce something modest, we thought.
This waiting period, the important part being the counseling that the couples would undergo, because, for instance, Pennsylvania some states do have a waiting period when someone is just alleging irreconcilable differences. Right, but you're talking more than that. You're talking about a required counseling to go through. I mean, that's part of it too, but just to quickly, not to go into this in too much detail, but sure. But if you look at the history of NoFault and you look at the history of how the laws have changed over time, and I did an article on this, I think it was for the Huffington Post a while back, because I wanted to take a look at waiting periods generally. Let's just say, you just don't do anything else, but just put a meaningful waiting period in there. Okay. And you'll find that the laws have really scaled back. I mean, there used to be longer waiting periods. And so there was a correlation, a natural correlation between a longer waiting period and a decreased divorce rate. Okay. So what happened is, with these no-fault laws, all the waiting periods got rolled back too.
You know, if it was a year, it went to 6 months, it went to 3 months, it went to 60 days, 30 days. You've had this massive rollback in the last 50 years. And much of it happened very, very early on. Okay. That, you know, and it's like, well, you know, 60 days, you can get in, you can get out. And we know from the research that we now have is that these second marriages that people sometimes just go right into fail at worse rates than the first. And then if they're already on the third, we know that the thirds fail more than the first and the second. And it just, so there is a natural correlation between pausing and taking a meaningful period to pause. And children need adjustment too. I mean, you know, people say, oh, children are resilient, whatever. Well, you know, I can debate that, but children need a meaningful time of a timeout. I mean, I used to give my kids timeouts. So that answers your question.
I still do. It does. Yeah. It does. Thank you. So let's shift gears and go on something more positive. Your reinvention story after a painful loss. What doesn't break you makes you stronger. Share with us your journey after this painful, traumatic event you went through, your divorce.
Okay. So, you know, I became a single mother, not by choice. And, you know, financially, my income went down. And so, you know, for so long, I guess, I didn't realize that I had continued to be in so much pain. I mean, I was in pain for a long time, and the divorce process was very protracted, about 6.5 years. And then I became, a single mother, and, you know, temping, and because there were no good law jobs anymore for me, because I'd kind of, you know, I don't know, aged out of the market. I don't know. And also that was at the time of the 2008 crash, and the legal market crashed in New York too. So I was temping and renting out part of my house and raising 2 teenagers. So it was pretty crazy. And I would just have to say that I didn't realize until about 2012, 13, this whole like year and a half of my life, that where basically I had to sell the house because I could no longer afford the mortgage. One daughter had gone to college and had graduated, and the other was on her way. That I realized how much pain I was still in. And I was really caught by surprise, because I thought, well, I had, you know, and I had certainly made some effort to heal. And, you know, I had gone to therapy a little bit. I was into meditation. I had a great church family and friends, but I was still in tremendous pain. And that just kind of blew my mind. So I spent a year sort of decluttering my house, because I had to get it ready to stage and look pretty and put it on the market. And I was, you know, my daughter was, you know, doing applications for college. And so I was about to have an empty nest. And all of these, so, you know, it wasn't just divorce, it was all of these things that were coming at me sort of really quickly, you know, with the aftermath of the divorce, mid-age, the empty nest, losing my home. You know, it wasn't just a house, it was our home, and where my children grew up. So all of these kind of losses were coming at me like fast and furiously. And I was decluttering my house and cleaning things out. And as I did this, what I started to sense is my attachment to things. Well, first of all, I sensed that I hadn't really grieved, because I was just in constant motion. And so I really hadn't gone through this grieving process for the loss of my family, the loss of, you know, so much that I had invested so much in my marriage. I hadn't really grieved. I'd cried a lot, that's for sure. But I really believe that part of that, the grieving process, is the second part, and that is letting go. So I had not gone through the letting go part of the process. And this process of going through everything in my life, I mean, literally I had 4 floors, a cellar, a backyard, the kids' stuff, my ex's stuff, people who'd owned the house before left stuff in the cellar. I mean, just a nightmare of things to go through. And I knew somehow intuitively that the process of doing this was going to reveal something to me. I just felt like it was there was going to be something in there for me. And as I started to go through all of this, I realized that my pain had been coming from my holding on not just to the stuff and the trappings of life and the house, but my holding on to the fact that things just hadn't turned out the way that I wanted them to. And that was very painful. And so I literally started physically letting go of stuff. And as I started physically letting go of stuff, the pain that I thought it was going to cause wasn't happening. I was starting to feel lighter and happier. And I was meeting people that I was giving stuff away to. And that really just like, I was like, wow, this is amazing. The opposite of exactly what I thought was going to happen. Like, this is going to break me down completely. The opposite happened. I started feeling lighter. And so I was like, I was on a mission now. Let go of everything you can. Just get rid of stuff and sell the house. And so, you know, I started to understand too, later when I was able to process all of this. And that is, one of the fundamental truths of life is that everything is the nature of change. Nothing stays the same. And that doesn't mean that we shouldn't try and save the things in our life that are important, our marriage, our home, the stability for our kids, all of those things. But things do change. Life does change. We get older. The kids leave the nest. Sometimes we lose the job, the finances, that is what we're not taught. And what we're taught is that when that happens, we just try and grab on and hold on tighter, keep things as they were, or if we don't, then we try and replace them with other things. Well, I'll just get another house, or I'll get another partner, or I'll get another job, and that'll fix everything that I've lost because I'll just replace it. And in my mind, sometimes that's more reinvention rather than resurrection, which is the subtitle to my book, Midlife Resurrection. So I think resurrection is more a rebirth, a reclaiming your life, a total cleansing of the way that you look at things and your reference points. And, you know, in the process of this whole thing too, I was able to do sort of a life review and look at myself, look at the person that I had been, look at the accomplishments that I'd made, and reconnect with that person that I fundamentally had always been. And I believe that is a positive person, a joyful person, a person who is capable, who's courageous. And so all of those things allowed me to really see who I really was and reconnect with that. And in the process, just start over, because all that fear, you know, for the most part, not entirely, but for the most part, a lot of that luggage of fear that I'd carried around was just gone. So.
And as you mentioned that you did write a book, Disassembly Required, a Memoir of Midlife Resurrection. Is there any specific message to the reader other than letting go, adapting to change?
Yeah, I mean, that's all part of it. And I would have to say, you know, just a little caveat, you know, it's yes, the backstory is divorce, but I went through many other losses. And so I look at it, I think that we need templates in our society. We have movies and books that talk about, you know, wild journeys and whatever. We need practical things for people. How do, you know, we can't all, you know, go off to Bali and find, you know, someone new and eat our way through Italy. You know, most of us are just regular people, and we need practical ways to heal from loss and to start over. And so I kind of look at my book, you know, that I hope that it is that. Many people would write to me and say, you know, I'm in pain because of my writings. How do I save my marriage? And, you know, I thought to myself, well, I wasn't able to save my own marriage. I can point them in the right direction to help, but I'm not a therapist and I didn't succeed. But what I can tell tell them how to do is how to deal with the pain. I can tell them how they can start over. I can tell them that they are braver and more courageous. And I guess maybe this is the central part of the central point of my book. You're more brave and courageous than you know. And you can do this, and you can be happy and joyful again.
Beverly, in the description portion of the video, our viewers can go and get any link, all your contact information. But for people driving in their cars and just listening, can you tell us where we can learn more about you?
So my website is beverlywillett.com, and there's information there about my book. I have most of the articles that have an online link. I've got links there, so you can read hundreds of articles that I've written on various topics, and they're all kind of, personal essays. I've written lots of op-eds. So you can go there if you have a book club and you'd like for me to either come in person, if it's not too far from Savannah, Georgia, where I live now. I'll come in person, or I can do virtually. I've done virtual book events. So I hope you'll take a look at that and consider asking me to come and talk with you.
Beverly,
I guess at Beverly Willett is my Twitter. And I'm also on Facebook. So you can find me by looking up my name and find me on Facebook as well.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing all that. But Beverly, we're out of time, so we're going to leave it there. But I want to thank you for being a guest on the Law Center videocast.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed it.
We've been here with Beverly Willett, and I am your host, Larry DeMarco. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe, and click the notification bell so you can be alerted of new videos. Tune in every Tuesday night at 7, where you can watch together with other viewers. Again, check the description portion of the video where you can learn more about Beverly Willett and the Law Center. Thanks for watching. Tune in next time. Bye for now.